Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for coming back this week. We are live. We are just getting live here on X and YouTube. There are plans, of course, to continue to spread forward towards Rumble and other places beyond that. But hi everyone. So if you're uh, returning, I know we assigned some homework last week. I'm sure some of you are going to be asking about that. We'll get to that a little bit later in the class. But before we get into the Poe class, I wanted to just give a little bit of a wrap up on what we ended up doing this week, and how it ties into the greater Vega for Congress project as a whole. I mean, I know some of you know that I've been teasing about the upcoming Vega 26, and that's what it'll be for now, just a tease. Um, what we did this week was we were able to make sure that Scott Ritter, who was supposed to speak at the Tudor City Steakhouse um, uh, on Wednesday, had a place to speak. The Tudor City Steakhouse was swamped with tons of death threats. And so the pressure got to the venue, and as a result, we were able to as a result, they canceled the venue. So then I got contacted by Scott's people, and I was asked to find an alternate venue, which I did. And it was in the Bronx. And it turned out to be a pretty great venue. And I was happy to see a lot of you who came out, a lot of you who either petitioned for me or came out and passed out leaflets for me or were in the street corners with us. It was really great to see all of you again. And some of you I hadn't seen in a long time, and it was fun. And there, Anya Kay and Scott Ritter came and they talked about their book, which is excerpts of the book that they just published that were excerpts from interviews that they've done before. And they also incorporated QR codes with it. So I thought it was brilliant, this sort of mixed media, new age kind of approach to writing books, where what they're doing is, you know, you can watch the full interviews here, scan the QR code, but you also have the physical book. So I thought that was quite genius. But the important thing there is that it's sort of like in the same pattern of what we did with Mark Perlmutter. Because with Mark Perlmutter, he needed a place to speak when he came up in November 1st or November 2nd. And he was supposed to speak at Mount Sinai, and a similar thing had happened. Only this time, I think it was a lot of the upper administration of the hospital had also put a lot of pressure and brought the hammer down and canceled the event. But we were able to secure an alternate venue for Mark Perlmutter. So we continue in this tradition where we make sure that the people who need to be heard can have a place to be heard. And that is something that we have very big plans for with this tribunal idea. You'll be hearing more and more about it. But basically, we need to do something where the doctors who were in Gaza can do a tribunal, a modern day tribunal. I've actually been seeing people like Max Blumenthal calling for there to be a Nuremberg 2.0. Now, I personally think that that's a good idea, and these tribunals will help towards getting that idea across. And so that's what we did this week. And I also just want to urge people, if you want to join us in any of these activities, for example, the Doctors Against Genocide are planning another Washington, D.C. trip February 19th. But I think that we will be going down there more frequently than once a month. Especially around this idea of exposing the liars who are trying to keep Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel out of the confirmations. Personally, I believe that Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel should be nominated into their positions in the cabinet. But there are people who don't want that to happen. And it's not because I think Tulsi Gabbard and Kash Patel are like the be all end all American heroes that exemplify everything I want in government or even in a government figure or anything like that. It's who they're not that's important, right? Kash Patel was talking about dismantling the FBI and exposing it. In fact, he was on a podcast on Sean Ryan's podcast back in September, I think, and he had also written a book called Government Gangsters, where he was just naming the names and going through exactly the kind of corrupt, rotten system that the FBI has become in its conjunction with the overall deep state apparatus. And Tulsi Gabbard similarly has always said and been outspoken when it comes to being right. In fact, She stood up against the provocations for the war in Syria in the 2017, 2018, when everybody was calling Bashar al-Assad a dictator for gassing his own people. She went and met with the guy. She spoke with the guy and she told the truth. And as a result, she was slandered. She was called all kinds of things. And then she ran for president. Some people may remember her presidential run in 2020, where she made Kamala Harris look like a complete fool. And so I'm sure there's some people who want some political payback for that. But regardless, we will be in Washington pushing a new dossier called the Liars Bureau, which will be exposing who doesn't want these people confirmed. And if you want to join us for that, definitely sign up on our website at votevega.nyc. I'm praying I have a banner here. Jesus, I don't have a banner with votevega.nyc. I'm going to pop that up right now. So votevega.nyc, that's the website at which people can sign up and be active with us. Without further ado, I think it is time for us to pass things off to our friend, Dennis Speed. Dennis, are you there?
Yes, I am. I think I'm here, and I believe I've got a couple of other friends of mine with me, but we'll see them. You'll see one of them there.
Okay. Oh,
So that is sort of the appropriate by way of tonight's stories. Okay. Uh, because what we're going to do tonight, we've been doing these classes for a while, or discussions really for a while. Last week, and particular, we discussed the city of London. We also had discussed it a bit earlier, but we weren't discussing the city of London because of any interest in it per se. We were interested in and are interested in the work of Edgar Poe. Edgar Poe, the poet and the member of the secret intelligence agency known as the Society of the Cincinnati. Wasn't really that it was secret. It was really a American intelligence agency which was against secrecy, actually, but was composed primarily of descendants of the officers of the American Revolution. And Poe's grandfather, David Poe, was the quartermaster for the Marquis de Lafayette during the American Revolution. Poe met the Marquis de Lafayette when he was 15 years old in 1824, at the point that Lafayette returned to the United States as part of an effort to elect the last functioning living member of the original American Revolution, John Quincy Adams. Adams had acted as a spy and a confidant of his father, John Adams, and of Benjamin Franklin, and so on in Paris. So from the age of 9, 10, he was incorporated de facto into the American Revolutionary Forces, and he ran for and became president in 1824. And Lafayette was here in part to secure that occur. In addition to that, he arrived at the point where the Apollo project of that time, the Erie Canal, was largely completed. And the relationship between that American intelligence agency and the great projects that ultimately created the United States is very, very important. An indirect descendant of this, at the point that it no longer was hereditary, was the American president Abraham Lincoln, who was one of the pallbearers for John Quincy Adams at the point of his death. And Lincoln was in the Congress for that one term. I want to, I think, just introduce the issue. We've talked here on this in the course of these classes about Edgar Poe being, as I say, an intelligence agent. People say, "Well, wait a minute. We just thought he was a writer." In fact, we didn't just think he was a writer. We thought he was some kind of degenerate. He's some kind of opium eater or alcoholic. And certainly weird, eccentric, writes these weird, eccentric stories. And that's sort of what people think they know about Poe. And he's attracted all sorts of sometimes unfortunate admirers over time. We want to do is show you an example of what we mean by the problem of trying to even take a look at Poe and the issue that is at the center of what people call intelligence work, but mistake often. And what we're going to do is show you the text of tonight, and we're going to bring this up. If we can have someone read that, Jose. I don't know if we have also a poster of it, the Brand X version of tonight's story. And if we don't have an actual poster, just have someone read the beginning of it.
Hold on. The Brand X story is coming up right now. Let me see if I can hold this up here. Okay. Let me see if I can also pull this up here on the Brand X. Is that what you called it?
Yeah.
Okay.
The Brand X version of tonight's story.
Okay.
So if you go, for example, on your internet and you look up the story, you will get this version or a version similar to it.
Okay. The Assignation, Edgar Poe, the version X story. Stay for me there, I will not fail, to meet thee in that hollow vale. Exequy on the death of his wife by Henry King, Bishop of Chichester. Ill-fated and mysterious man, bewildered in the brilliancy of thine own imagination, and fallen in the flames of thine own youth, again in fancy I behold thee. Once more thy form hath risen before me, not, oh, not as thou art, in the cold valley and shadow, but as thou shouldst be, squandering away a life of magnificent meditation in that sea of dim visions, thine own Venice, which is a star-beloved Elysium of the sea, and the wide windows of whose Palladian palaces look down with a deep and bitter meaning upon the secrets of her silent waters. Yes, I repeat it, as thou shouldst be. There are surely other words than this, other thoughts than the thoughts of the multitude, other speculations than the speculations of the sophist. Who then shall call thy conduct into question? Who blame thee for thy visionary hours, or denounce those occupations as a wasting away of life, which were but the overflowing of thine everlasting energies?
Okay, so now that's the Brand X version. Now, Jose, I think you have the real version. If you can bring that up,
Coming
and
up now.
if you want, and in this version, which is the one that Poe published in 1834, so he would have been 25 years old, is called The Visionary. He did later change the title to The Assignation. But what we're going to do is have Jose read this version and read it through until the what you've just heard.
Okay, sure. There was another comment that your cats are very cute. All right, here we go. Okay, The Visionary. Ich habe gelebt und geliebt. Schiller's Wallenstein. I have lived and I have loved. Und sterb ich denn, so sterb ich doch. Durch sie, Goethe. And if I die, at least I die with her. With her. There is a name, a sound, which, above all other music, vibrates upon my ear with a delicious yet wild and solemn melody, devoutly admired by the few who read and by the very few who think. It is a name not as yet indeed blazoned in the escutcheon of immortality, but there, nevertheless, heralded in character of the Tyrian fire hereafter, to be rendered legible by the breath of centuries. It is a name, moreover, which for reasons intrinsically of no weight, yet in fact conclusive, I am determined to conceal, nor will I, by a fictitious appellation, dishonor the memory of that great dead whose life was so little understood, and the receive the account of whose melancholy end is a tissue of malevolent blasphemies. I am not of that class of writers who, making some euphonous cognomen the keystone to the arc of their narrations, can no more conclude without the one that the architect without the other. Ill-fated and mysterious man. Oh, now we're back to where we started in the.
Right. So for everybody that is listening or is in the class there, and I have to be where I am, but I just want to say the first question might be, why is this missing? Why do you not have the quote from Schiller's Wallenstein? Why do you not have the quote from Goethe? That's Das Weilchen, by the way, same song as is set by Mozart, the same poem that's set by Mozart. And why omit this? Thereby hangs the tale of the issue of the importance and the unrecognized significance of Edgar Poe. Why are you mutilating his writings online, where, of course, it doesn't matter how long or short they are? What would be the purpose of this missing? Or at least, why are you not made aware that there is such another version? And in what way is this shift things? We have another quote, which is by someone else in that version. So rather than take this up, we're going to be reading this story tonight. Now, to set this story up, we want to point out the story is set in Venice, in the city of Venice. And we want to first play a short, actually split it this way, a short video. But no, I would do it this way. Let me refer to something here. There is a name, a sound, which above all other music vibrates upon my ear with a delicious, yet wild and solemn melody. Now, we made a point a couple of classes ago. We were talking about a certain form in music called the rondo. And this is a form in which you have a particular musical passage that is played, and then you'll have a variation on it. And the variations can often be very different, but you return always to, and you repeat apparently verbatim, like a refrain, that same passage. What we want to do before we get into tonight's story is to illustrate something, because the story that you're going to read is a piece of music, or it's a musical score. It's not a musical score quite like a poem, although there is a poem embedded in the story. And in one sense, the form of this story, which I would normally not say this, but we'll say it tonight because it will help to speed things along. It's in the form of what's called recitative. So there's a sort of a narration, and then it breaks into a poem at a certain point, and then goes away from a poem. And so what we want to do is first try to illustrate the importance of repetition in music. Because, in other words, one of the biggest problems with reading these stories is to think of them as stories as opposed to scores. That's not true of everybody, but in the case of Poe in particular, you can often think of these stories as musical scores. And so it's also true of poetry in general. So what we're going to do is we're going to play you two examples. They're both relatively short. One is 4 minutes and one is 3 minutes. They're both taken from Beethoven, and they're both piano sonatas. So it's an individual solo pianist. Both of them are playing two different pieces. The first is from the early period of Beethoven's life. It's a piano sonata. It's played by Andras Schiff. And then the second is from the last sonata that Beethoven wrote at the very end of his life, or toward the very end of his life. Opus 32, Opus 111, and Sonata number 32. So, Jose, go ahead and let's play the Schiff. So you heard that the pianist began to repeat what he was playing. We didn't play the entire repeat. We're just trying to establish that there's a function to this. We're not going to say what it is. You'll notice and would have noticed, particularly the repeated notes in the left hand, or the lower bass notes, which you heard being repeated continually there. That happens to be in this piece, but it's also important to select an example that makes this point about repetition within the body of the text itself, but also in terms of this function of a repeat. We're going to have a second example. This is played in a major key. The second is in a minor key, this key being C minor. Different pianist, Claudio Arrau. This is so that's the beginning of Beethoven's life. This is the conclusion, the end, last sonata that he wrote, Opus 111. And again, what we're going to do is play through the first development of the idea, and then a portion of the repeat. Okay. It ended it just before I wanted to end it. I don't want to end either one of these. Both of these, it can be a bit of a sacrifice. It is a sacrifice to do that, but it's important. I think you got the point here. At least you could see that there's a repetition. There's an idea put forward. It's a complex idea. Then there's a repetition. Um, and it's a musical idea. We want to treat these stories the way they have to be treated. Um, and tonight, we are going to be talking about this story. We're going to be reading this story, The Assignation. It's about Venice. I'm going to show you something about the city of Venice because there's something that makes Venice distinct from all other or most other cities, certainly in the world. So we can run that video.
Venice was born in the lagoon because the lagoon was useful to Venice. So Venetians shaped the lagoon the way they wanted.
But this environment posed a problem. How could they build on such soft ground?
I'm not that heavyweight. I weigh 65 kilos. But I'm thinking like this.
65 kilos is around 140 pounds. If the mud can't support this, how could it bear the weight of a wooden house? Let alone one of Venice's grand stone buildings. The solution? Forcing wooden poles into the soft mud. These poles don't support the weight. They transform the mud around them.
The idea is to do a little experiment. When you plant many poles, they compact the mud between them. The water is pushed out, and the compaction of the mud itself make the mud more capable of supporting weight.
Modern-day excavations under the city reveal that Venetians maximize the compaction of the mud by using a large number of poles packed tightly together. Directly on top, they placed wooden planks, then impermeable limestone, and above the waterline, bricks.
No, qua così, lo metti qua così. Okay, you see, I'm lightweight, more than him. You can also try. Okay, you see, Omar is not sinking because it's the effect of the pores that compacts the mud between them. So it changes from more, I would say, fluid-like to more solid-like. And the proof of this is when we put the plank over there and do the same thing on the mud without the pores underneath. You see, there's a difference.
This technology is the secret of Venice's construction and longevity. And over the centuries, they created the city we see today.
That is Venice. It's a city that is built in a swamp, not built on anything solid. And it's a metaphor, in one sense, for another way that the city has been talked about, the city of sin, the city of deception. There's something we'll quote here to give people an idea of its role. It played many roles, but I'm going to quote something from Lyndon LaRouche. The currently ending 500-year cycle in European history, which came to the surface during the 15th century. Can you bring that up, by the way? Thank you. The currently ending 500-year cycle in European history, which came to the surface during the 15th century, has been determined by the emerging conflict between the two leading forces within European culture during that century. On the one side, there were the forces of the Golden Renaissance, centered around such figures as Cardinal Nicholas of Cusa in the 1439 to 40 Council of Florence. On the opposing side was the re-emerging power of the Venice-centered European aristocratic and financial oligarchy, financier oligarchy. All European history since the 15th century within Europe and globally has been dominated by the cultural conflict between the radiated influence of the Renaissance and the opposing Venice-launched force of the so-called Enlightenment. All European history since the 15th century within Europe and globally has been dominated by the cultural conflict. And it was this cultural conflict that Edgar Poe found himself recruited into and responding to. We referenced 2 weeks ago that Poe had written a story called Silence. And when we read the story, which people found, almost impenetrable, we referenced that it was called written in the manner of the psychological autobiographists. We referenced that the person that was being particularly referenced there was Benjamin Disraeli, who would become, after when Poe was alive, the prime minister of Great Britain, who at the age of 28 wrote a novel called Contarini Fleming. And Contarini refers to one of the most important families, notorious families of Venice, the family of Gasparo Contarini, Cardinal Gasparo Contarini. The story is as it was said, psychological autobiography. So it was Disraeli saying he felt himself to be directly related to the Contarini family. He was not, in fact, not merely because he was Jewish or something like that, but because it was just factually not true. But psychologically, he was. He's an important figure. We're not going to talk about him tonight, but the issue is, why would he think of Venice? What's the point of that? Why is that important to him? Let's tell a story which we're only going to remind some people of so that one understands why we're reading this story and what it has to do. If you think you came in, let's say a few minutes ago and you're hearing this, what's it got to do with now? Some of you remember a case from about 40 years ago of a banker named Roberto Calvi. Roberto Calvi was found hanged underneath a bridge in London. It was referred to, if you will, as Blackfriars Bridge, if you will. Calvi had been a banker. He'd been the head of what was called Banco Ambrosiano. That bank had been known also as the Vatican Bank. It had been said to have been laundering money in various ways for various political entities, from the Contras to the Solidarity operation that was laundered money into Poland. Without getting into it, the bank had been collapsed or began to be collapsed. This was shortly after the attempted assassination of Pope John Paul II, which was the year earlier. I think it was June of 1981. Calvi went missing from his apartment in Rome in June of 1982. And what he did was, he initially, nobody knew, but he apparently had used a false passport, and he went initially to the city of Venice. And then he hired a private plane to go to London via Zurich. And so what happened was, that was on the 10th of June, 8 days later, on Friday the 18th, a postal clerk was crossing the Blackfriars Bridge, and he noticed that Calvi's body was hanging underneath it. He had a bunch of bricks in his pockets, and he had about $14,000 U.S. equivalent, but in 3 different currencies. It was all in his pocket, so he clearly wasn't hanged for robbery. Now, he was a member of something called the Propaganda Due, the P2 Lodge. This is a Masonic lodge which was also called Blackfriars, the Frati Neri. After his hanging, this became a big issue, and this was when the so-called Operation Gladio, which many people have heard about and so on, was exposed when the list of the members of the lodge was made public. it's important to know that in the history of Italy, and particularly the recent history of Italy, the people associated with the P2 Lodge were said by Italian investigators with what they called the Parliamentary Committee on the Failed Identification of the Authors of Terrorist Massacres, called the Terrorism Committee for short. They said this committee operated between 1994 and 2001. Quote, it may be worth remembering that there were 14,500 acts of violence that they connected in one way or the other to the apparatus that came out at the P2 Lodge. Quote, it may be worth remembering that these acts have left behind 491 dead and 1,181 injured and maimed, figures of a war with no parallel in any other European country. So I'm citing this because, I mean, often I guess various people here know and otherwise know, people like to talk about Trilateral Commission or the Illuminati or the this or the that, and it's all real mysterious. These things weren't mysterious for Edgar Poe. And so we are now going to begin reading our story. Sorry for that long introduction, but I think it was necessary for the purposes of what we're going to do. We're going to now read straight through. We recognize there'll be some words that people won't know or other things. If you need any of that, and that's important if you need it, put it in the chat. We'll take it up as we go. But I want to get us started right away with the reading of the story called The Visionary, otherwise called The Assignation. And I think what I'm going to do is ask that Jose start us off. Does that work with you?
Yeah, that's fine. And you want us to, should we start over from the beginning? I guess we should, right?
Yeah. People are, so yes, that's the point of the refrain idea.
Just before we go right into the story, I think somebody here, Jose Mauricio Malaya, wanted to answer your question as to why there would be different versions. This person just said to control the narrative. And then somebody else responded to my introduction by saying that I should not be supporting Tulsi Gabbard. I know we're not going to take these up now. I just wanted to acknowledge these are in the chat. We are reading them, and I welcome disagreement. But for now, we're going to begin the story again. And somebody just walked in at the perfect time as we're about to begin the story here. So this is Edgar Poe, The Visionary. This is the version that was put out in January of 1834, as Dennis said. And The Visionary. It begins with a quote from Schiller, first in German, then in English. Ich habe gelebt und geliebt, from Schiller's Wallenstein. I have lived and I have loved. Und sterb ich denn, so sterb ich doch durch sie, Goethe, or in English, and if I die, at least I die with her. With her. There is a name, a sound, which above all other music vibrates upon my ear with a delicious yet wild and solemn melody, devoutly admired by the few who read and by the very few who think. It is a name not as yet, indeed, blazoned in the escutcheon of immortality, but there, nevertheless, heralded in character of the Tyrian fire hereafter, to be rendered legible by the breath of centuries. It is a name, moreover, which for reasons intrinsically of no weight, yet in fact conclusive, I am determined to conceal. Nor will I, by a fictitious appellation, dishonor the memory of that great dead whose life was so little understood, and the received amount of whose melancholy end is a tissue of malevolent blasphemies. I am not of that class of writers who, making some euphonious cognomen, the keystone to the arc of their narrations, can no more conclude without the one than the architect without the other. Ill-fated and mysterious man, bewildered in the brilliancy of thine own imagination and fallen in the flames of thine own youth, again in fancy I behold thee, Once more thy form hath risen before me. Not as thou art in the cold valley and shadow, but as thou shouldst be, squandering away a life of magnificent meditation in that city of dim visions, thine own Venice, which is a star beloved city of the sea, and the wide windows of whose paladin palaces, gleaming with the fires of midnight revelry, look down with a sad and bitter meaning upon the secrets of her silent waters. Yes, I repeat it, as thou shouldst be. There are surely other worlds than this, other thoughts that the thoughts of the multitude, I would almost venture to say, other speculations than the speculations of the sophist. Who, then, shall call thy conduct into question? Who blame thee for thy visionary hours, or declare those occupations a wasting away of life, which were but the overflowings of thine everlasting energies? It was at Venice, beneath the covered archway there called the Ponte di Sospiri, that met me, for the third or fourth time, the person of whom I speak. It is, however, with a confused recollection that I recall to mind the circumstances of that meeting. Yet I remember, how should I, how should I forget? The deep midnight, the bridge of sighs, the beauty of woman, and the demon of romance, who stalked up and down the narrow canal. It was a night of unusual gloom. The great clock of the piazza had sounded the 5th hour of the Italian evening. The square of the Campanile lay silent and deserted, and the lights in the old ducal palace were dying fast away. I was returning home from the Piazzetta by the way of the Grand Canal, but as my gondola arrived opposite the mouth of the Canal San Marco, a female voice from his recesses burst suddenly upon the night in one wild, hysterical, and long-continued shriek. Startled at the sound, I sprang upon my feet, while my gondolier, letting slip his oar, lost it in the pitchy darkness beyond a chance of recovery. And we were left at the mercy of the current, which here sets from the greater into the smaller channel. Like some huge bird of sable plumage, we were drifting slowly down towards the bridge of sighs, when 1,000 flambeaux flashing from the windows and down the staircases of the ducal palace turned, all at once, that deep gloom into a ghastly and supernatural clay. Oh, day, excuse me. And supernatural day. A child slipping from the arms of its own mother had fallen from an upper window of the lofty structure in the deep and dim canal. The quiet waters had closed placidly over their victim, and although my own gondola was the only one in sight, many a stout swimmer already in the stream was seeking in vain upon the surface the treasure which was, alas, was only to be found in the abyss. I think we switch readers.
I'll take it.
Okay.
Upon the broad black marble flagstones at the entrance of the palace, and a few steps above the water, stood a figure which none who then saw can ever since have forgotten. It was the Marchesa Bianca, the adoration of all Venice, the gayest of the gay, the most lovely where all were beautiful, but alas, the young wife of the old and intriguing Mentoni, and the mother of that fair child, her first and only one, who now, deep beneath the murky water, was thinking in bitterness of heart upon her gentle caresses, and exhausting its little life in struggles to call upon her name. She stood alone. Her small, bare, and silvery feet gleamed in the black mirror of marble beneath. Her hair, partly loosened for the night from its ballroom array, clustered amid a shower of diamonds, round and round her classical head in curls like the young hyacinth. A snowy white and gauze-like drapery seemed to be nearly the sole covering to her delicate form. But the midsummer and midnight air was hot, sullen, and still, and no motion, no shadow of motion in that statue-like form itself stirred even the folds of that raiment, a very vapor which hung around it as the heavy marble hangs around the weeping Niobe. Yet, strange to say, her large, lustrous eyes were not bent downwards to the grave wherein her dearest hope lay buried, but riveted, strange to say, in a widely different direction. The prison of the city is, I think, the fairest building in all Venice. But how could that lady gaze so fixedly upon it when her only child lay stifling at her feet? Yon dark, gloomy niche, too, yawns right opposite her chamber window. What then could there possibly be in its shadows, in its architecture, in its ivy-wreathed and solemn cornices, that the Marchesa de Mentoni had not wondered at 1,000 times before? Nonsense! Who does not remember that at such a time as this, the eye, like a shattered mirror, multiplies the images of its sorrow and sees in a million far-off places the woe which is close at hand? Many steps above the Marchesa, and within the arch of the water gate stood in full dress the satyr-like figure of Mentoni himself. He was occasionally occupied in thrumming a guitar, and seemed ennuied to the very death, as at intervals he gave directions for the recovery of his child. Stupefied and bewildered, I had no power to move from the upright position I had assumed upon first hearing the shriek, and must have presented to the eyes of the agitated group a spectral and ominous appearance, as with my pale countenance and rigid limbs I drifted down among them in that funeral gondola. All efforts were in vain. Many of the most energetic in the search were relaxing their endeavors and yielding to a gloomy sorrow. There seemed but little hope for the child, how much less then for the mother. But now, from the dark niche which had been before mentioned as forming part of the old Republican prison, as fronting the lattice of the Marchesa, a figure, muffled in a cloak, stepped out within reach of the light, and pausing a moment upon the verge of the giddy height, plunged headlong into the canal. And as in an instant afterwards, he stood with the still living and breathing child within his grasp. Upon the marble flagstones by the side of the Marchesa, his cloak, heavy with the water, became unfastened, and falling in folds about his feet, discovered to the wonder-stricken spectators the graceful person of a very young man with whose name the greater part of Europe was then ringing. No word spoke the stranger, but the Marchesa, she will now receive her child. She will press it to her heart. She will cling to its little form and smother it with her caresses. Alas, another's arms have taken it away and borne it afar off, unnoticed, into the palace. And the Marchesa, a tear is gathering into her eyes, those eyes which, like Pliny's own acanthus, are soft and almost liquid. Her beautiful lip trembles. The entire woman thrills throughout the soul, and the statue is started into life. The pallor of the marble countenance, the swelling of the marble bosom, the very purity of the marble feet is suddenly flushed over with a tide of ungovernable crimson, and a slight shudder quivers about the entire frame like a soft wind at Napoli above the rich silver lilies in the grass. Next.
Okay, coming up now.
And let's have the next reader ready, okay, by the way. We just, okay.
Why should the lady blush. To this demand, there was no answer, except that having left in the haste and terror of a mother's heart the privacy of her own bureau, she had
No,
neglected to.
boudoir.
Oh, really? It says bureau in ours.
Oh.
So, okay, so yours is, yeah, there's some slight changes, several of them already. Okay, so the privacy of her own boudoir, she had neglected to enthrall her feet in their tiny slippers and utterly forgotten to throw over her Venetian shoulders that drapery which was their due. What other possible cause could there have been for her so blushing? For the glance of those large, appealing eyes? For the unusual tumult of that throbbing bosom? For the convulsive pressure of that trembling hand, which fell as Mentoni turned into the palace accidentally upon the hand of the stranger? Or for the singularly low tone of those unmeaning words which the lady uttered and departed? Thou hast conquered, she said, and the murmurs of the water deceived me. Thou hast conquered 1 hour after sunrise. Let it be. The tumult had subsided. The lights had died away within the piazza, and the stranger, whom I now recognized, stood alone among the flags. He shook with inconceivable agitation, and his eyes glanced around in the gloom in search of a gondola. I could do no less than offer him the service of my own. In a hurried manner, he accepted my civility. An oar was obtained at the water gate, and as we passed together to his residence, he rapidly recovered his self-possession and spoke of our former slight acquaintance in terms of great apparent cordiality. There are some subjects upon which I take pleasure in being minute. The person of the stranger, let me call him by his title, who to all the world was still a stranger. The person of the stranger is one of these subjects. In height, he might have been below rather than above medium size, although there were moments of intense passion within his frame when his frame actually expanded and belied the assertion. The light, almost slender symmetry of his figure promised more of that ready activity which he evinced at the bridge of sighs than of that Herculean strength which he had been known to wield without an effort upon occasions of more dangerous emergency. With the mouth and chin of a deity, a nose like those delicate creations of the mind to be found only in the medallions of the Hebrew, full eyes whose shadows varied from pure hazel to intense and brilliant jet, a profusion of glossy black hair, from which a forehead rather low than otherwise gleamed forth at intervals, all light and ivory. His were features, than which I had seen, none more classically regular, except perhaps the marble ones of the Emperor Commodus. Yet his countenance was nevertheless one of those which all men have seen at some period of their lives and have never afterwards seen again. It had no peculiar, I wish to be perfectly understood, no settled, predominant expression to be fastened upon the memory. A countenance seen and instantly forgotten, but forgotten with a vague, intense, and never ceasing desire of recalling it to mind. Not that the spirit of each rapid passion failed at any time to throw its own distinct image upon the mirror of that face, but that mirror, mirror-like, retained no vestige of the passion when the passion had departed. Upon parting from him on the night of the adventure, he solicited me in an urgent manner to call upon him very early in the morning. Shortly after sunrise, I found myself accordingly at his palazzo, one of those huge piles of gloomy yet fantastic grandeur which tower above the waters of the Grand Canal. I was shown up a broad, winding staircase of mosaics into an apartment whose unparalleled splendor burst through the opening door with an actual glare, making me sick and dizzy with luxuriousness. I knew my acquaintance to be wealthy. Report had spoken of his possessions in terms which I had even ventured to call terms of ridiculous exaggeration. But as I gazed about me, I could with difficulty bring myself to believe that the wealth of any subject in Europe could have supplied the far more than imperial magnificence which burned and blazed around. Although, as I say, the sun had risen, yet the room was still brilliantly lighted up, and I judged from this circumstance, as well as from an air of apparent exhaustion in the countenance of my friend, that he had not retired to bed during the whole of the preceding night. In the architecture and embellishment of the chamber, the evident design was to dazzle and astound. Little attention had been paid to the decora of what is technically called keeping, or to the proprieties of nationality. The eye wandered from object to object and rested upon none, neither the grotesques of the Greek painters, nor the sculptures of the best Italian days, nor the huge carvings of untutored Egypt. Rich draperies in every part of the room trembled to the vibrations of low, melancholy music, whose unseen origin undoubtedly lay in the recesses of the red coral trellis work which tapestried the ceiling. The senses were oppressed by mingled and conflicting perfumes, reeking up from strange arabesque censers, which seemed actually endued with a monstrous vitality as their particular fires writhed up and down, and around their extravagant proportions. The rays of the rising sun poured in upon the whole through windows formed each of a single huge pane of crimson tinted glass, and glancing to and fro in 1,000 reflections from curtains which rolled from their cornices like streams of molten silver, mingled at length fitfully with the artificial light, and lay weltering and subdued upon a carpet of rich, liquid-looking cloth of gold.
Here then had the hand of genius been at work. A wilderness, a chaos of beauty was before me. A sense of dreamy and incoherent grandeur took possession of my soul, and I remained speechless. Laughed the proprietor, pointing me to a seat, and throwing himself back upon an ottoman. There was, I thought, a tincture of bitterness in the laugh, and I could not immediately reconcile myself to the bienséance of so singular a welcome. Continued he. I see you are surprised at my apartment, my statues, my pictures, my originality of conception and architecture and upholstery, absolutely drunk with my magnificence. Pardon me, my dear sir, pardon me. I must laugh or die, perhaps both, continued he, after a pause. Do you know, however, said he musingly, that at Sparta, which is now Palaukori, at Sparta, I say, to the west of the citadel, among the scarce visible ruins, is a kind of Sokli, upon which are still visible the letters Lazim. They are, I verily believe, part of Galasma. Galasma is Greek for laughter. How many divinities had altars at Sparta? And how strange that that of laughter should be found alone surviving. But just now, to be sure, I have no right to be surprised at your astonishment. Europe, the world, cannot rival this my regal cabinet. My other apartments, however, are mere matters of fact, ultras of fashionable insipidity. This is better than fashion, is it not? Yet this has but to be seen, to become the rage, that is to say, with those who could afford it at the expense of their entire patrimony. But I have guarded against any such profanation, with one exception. Here the pallor of death rapidly overspread his countenance, and as rapidly spread away. With one exception. You are the only human being, besides myself, who has ever set foot within its imperial precincts. I bowed in acknowledgement, for the unexpected eccentricity of his address and manner had filled me with amazement, and I could not express in words my appreciation of what I might have construed into a compliment. Here, said he, arising and leaning upon my arm, as he sauntered around the apartment, here are paintings of all ages, from the Greek painters to Cimabue, and from Cimabue to the present hour. Many are chosen, as you see, with little deference to the opinions of Virtu. Here, too, are some chefs d'oeuvre,
Chef-
chef d'oeuvre of the unknown great, and there unfinished designs by men celebrated in their day, whose very names the perspicacity of the academies has left to silence, and to me. What think you? Said he, turning as he spoke. What think you of this Madonna della Pietà?
Hold on for a minute, kind of just so people know. Cimabue is a painter, Italian painter of the 14th century. He was 13th century actually. He was a contemporary of Dante di Alighieri, and so he's the end of the medieval period. So he's saying from the Greek painters from 2500, from 500 BC through to 1300 plus. And then this next painter he's referring to is probably, for those who know who this is, Guido Reni, by the way. So go ahead. But that's what's happening here. He's referring to famous or well-known Italian painters.
Got it. It is Guido's own, I said, with all the enthusiasm of my nature. For I had been poring intently over its surpassing loveliness. It is Guido's own. How could you have obtained it? She is undoubtedly in painting what the Venus is in sculpture. Huh, said he, thoughtfully. The Venus. The beautiful Venus. The Venus of Venuses. The Venus de Medicis. The work of Cleomenes, the son of the Athenian, as much as it is the work of mine own hands. Part of the left arm and all the right are restorations, and the coquetry of that right arm lies, I think, the quintessence of affectation. The Apollo, too. You spoke of Apollo. It is a copy. There can be no reasonable doubt of it. Sir, I will not bow to falsity, although begrimed with age. There is no inspiration in the boasted Apollo, and the Antinous is worth a dozen of it. After all, there is much in the saying of Socrates, that the statuary found his statue in the block of marble. Michelangelo was not original in his couplet, non ha l'ottimo artista e un concetto, che un marmo solo in se non circonscriva. That translates to, not even the greatest sculptor can conceive an idea that a block of marble does not already contain. It has been, or should be remarked, that in the manner of the true gentleman, we are always aware of a difference from the bearing of the vulgar, without being able at once precisely to determine in what such difference consists. Although the remark to have applied in its full force to the outward demeanor of my friend, I felt it on that eventful morning, still more fully applicable to his moral temperament and character. Nor could I better define that peculiarity of spirit which seemed to place him so essentially apart from all other human beings, than by calling it a habit of intense and continual thought, pervading even his most trivial actions, intruding upon his moments of dalliance, and interweaving itself into his very flashes of merriment, like adders which ride from out the eyes of the grinning masks in the cornices around the temples of Cybele. Evan?
I could not help, however, repeatedly observing, through the mingled tone of levity and solemnity with which he rapidly descanted on matters of little importance, a certain air of trepidation, a nervous inquietude of manner, which appeared to me unaccountable and at times even filled me with alarm. Frequently pausing in the middle of a sentence, whose commencement he had apparently forgotten, he seemed to be listening in the deepest attention, as if either in expectation of a visitor or to sounds which must have had existence in imagination alone. It was during one of these apparent reveries or pauses of abstraction that, in turning over a page of Politian's beautiful tragedy, the Orfeo, which lay near me upon an ottoman, I found a passage underlined in pencil. It is a passage near the conclusion of the third act, a passage of heart-stirring pathos, a passage which, divested of its impurity, no man could read without a thrill, no maiden without a sigh. The whole page was blotted with fresh tears, and upon the opposite interleaf were the following lines written, as I now write them, in English, but in a hand so very different from the peculiar and bold characters of my acquaintance that I had difficulty in recognizing it as his own. Thou wast that all to me, love, for which my soul did pine. A green isle in the sea, love, a fountain and a shrine. All wreathed round with wild flowers, and all the flowers were mine. But the dream, it could not last. Young hope, that didst arise, but to be overcast. A voice from out the future cries, onward, while o'er the past, dim gulf, my spirit hovering lies. Mute, motionless, aghast. For alas, alas, with me, ambition, all is over. No more, no more, no more. Such language holds the solemn sea to the sands upon the shore. Shall bloom the thunder-blasted tree, or the stricken eagle soar? And all my hours are trances, and all my nightly dreams, are where the dark eyes glances, and where thy footstep gleams. In what ethereal dances, by far Italian streams. Alas, for that accursed time, they bore thee o'er their billow, from me to tilted age and crime, and an unholy pillow. from love and from our misty clime where weeps the silver willow. I'll pass it off to
Jose?
That
Oh.
these lines were written in English, a language which I had not believed their author acquainted, afforded me little matter for surprise. I was too well aware of the variety of his acquirements, as well as the strange pleasure he took in hiding them from the world, to be astonished at any similar discovery. But I must confess that the place of date of the manuscript appeared to me singular. It had been originally written London and afterwards carefully overscored, although not so effectually as to conceal the word from a scrutinizing eye. I repeat that this appeared to me singular, for I well remembered having asked him if he had ever met with some person, I think the Marchesa de Mentoni, who resided in England some years before her marriage. If he had at any time met with her in London, and his answer led me to understand that he had never visited Great Britain. I must here add that I have more than once heard, but of course never gave credit to a report involving so much improbability, that the person of whom I write was not only by birth, but in education an Englishman. There is one painting, said he, turning to me with evident emotion, as I replaced the volume upon the ottoman. There is one painting which you have not seen. And throwing aside a drapery, he discovered a full-length portrait of the Marchesa de Mentoni. Human art could have done no more in the accurate delineation of her superhuman beauty. The same sylph-like figure which stood before me the preceding night upon the steps of the ducal palace stood before me once again. But in the expression of her countenance, which was beaming all over with smiles, there still lurked that incomprehensible strain of melancholy, which is, I do believe, inseparable from the perfection of the beautiful. On a scroll which lay at her feet were these words, "I am waiting but for thee." Her right arm lay folded across her bosom, and with her left she pointed downwards to a curiously fashioned vase. One small fairy foot, alone visible, barely touched the earth, and scarcely discernible in the brilliant atmosphere which seemed to encircle and enshrine her loveliness, floated a pair of the most delicately imagined silvery wings. I glanced from the painting to the figure of my friend, and the powerful words of Chapman's Bussy d'Amboise quivered instinctively upon my lips. I am up here like a Roman statue. I will stand till death hath made him marble.
Come, said he at length, approaching a table of massy silver upon which were some beautifully dyed and enameled goblets, together with two large Etruscan vases filled with what I took to be vin de Baraque, and fashioned in the same extraordinary model as the vase in the foreground of the portrait. Come, he said abruptly, let us drink. It is early, but let us drink. It is indeed early, he continued, as a cherub with a heavy golden hammer made the chamber ring with the first hour after the sunrise. It is indeed early, but what matters it? Let us drink. Let us pour out. like true Persians, an offering that the solemn sun which these lamps and censers are struggling to overpower. Here, having made me pledge him in a bumper, he swallowed in rapid succession several goblets of the wine. To dream, continued he, resuming the tone of his desultory conversation as he held up to the rich light of a censer one of the magnificent vases, to dream has been the business of my life, and I have therefore decked out for myself, as you see, a bower of dreams. Here in the heart of Venice could I have erected a better? You behold around you, it is true, a medley of architectural embellishments. The chastity of Iona is offended by the antediluvian devices, and the sphinxes of Egypt are stretching upon cloth of gold. Yet the effect is incongruous to the timid alone. Properties of place, and especially of time, are the bugbears which terrify mankind from the contemplation of the magnificent. Once I was myself a decorist, but that sublimation of folly has palled upon my soul. All this is now the fitter for my purpose. Like these arabesque censers, my spirit is writhing in fire, and the whirling delirium of this scene is fashioning me for the wilder visions of that land of real dreams whither I am now rapidly departing. Thus saying, he confessed the power of the wine and threw himself at full length upon the chaise lounge. A quick step was now heard upon the staircase, and a loud knock at the door rapidly succeeded. I hurried to anticipate a second disturbance when a page of the Marchesa di Mentoni burst into the room and in a voice choking with emotion faltered out the incoherent words, "My mistress, Bianca, poison, horrible, horrible." Bewildered, I flew to the sleeper and endeavored to arouse him to a sense of the startling intelligence. But his lips were livid, his form was rigid, his beautiful eyes were riveted in death. Oh, shit. Sorry. I staggered back towards the table. My hand fell upon a cracked and blackened goblet, and a consciousness of the entire and terrible truth flashed suddenly over my soul.
Bam.
So it was poison that he drank at the end, and he killed himself. Oh, at least I die with her, and like that's why he keeps referring to Venice and the things he owns as she and her. He keeps applying it's like a Jim Jones kind of cult, like just drink this poison and die. What the fuck? Oh, it was pretty good.
You certainly have to go back to the beginning of the story to understand it, right?
Yeah. Right. Because it starts with they're on a boat, and then the lady screams, and then they
he's
lose
on a boat. The narrator.
Right, the narrator's on a boat. Right.
Right.
And then the lady screams, and they lose their oar, and the boat is being taken towards the scene.
And it's black.
It's black. Right.
Go ahead. And they're the only boat on the canal.
Yeah.
Even though it's 5 o'clock in the evening.
Right.
Okay, keep going. Fine.
And then some guy appears, right? And then he like dives for the kid, right? That like was drowning. And then he picks him up. He gets the kid and he says, like, I want you to meet me again. I want you to meet me again, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they go back to this guy's house, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he's like showing him all this stuff in the house. Like, look at this. Look what I got. It's like, I got original stuff here, man. This stuff's no.
Well, that's all right. That he has to get some other people in.
Okay.
Now this is fine. This is fine. I'll simply say one thing. This is all happening in Venice. That means nothing is as it seems.
Can I say something?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Karen.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm just going back to the scene, after he rescues the child. But the Marquesa, she will now receive her child. She will press it to her heart. She will cling to its little form and smother it with her caresses. Alas, another's arms have taken it away and borne it afar off unnoticed into the palace. And the Marquesa, a tear is gathering into her eyes. Those eyes which, like Pliny's own Acanthus, are soft and almost liquid. Her beautiful lip trembles. And then he asks, why is that lady blushing? And the ending, it makes clear like why all of that is happening, why she's crying and why she's blushing, because he doesn't know.
Wait. Don't continue. Let's ask some other people. I don't know who else, I'm here. Does anybody else have anything? Jose is appropriately mystified at the moment, which is
Yes.
useful. For everybody who is watching this, that's the point of not the point, but this is significant. This is an intelligence class, correct? So
Yeah.
all right. Anybody else? I didn't mean to interrupt you per se, but I just want to see if anybody else has got something to say. I don't know who else is assembled there.
Okay, Dick's coming up.
He just passed the Bridge of Sighs, the gondola, without an oar. The Bridge of Sighs is called that because it's where prisoners are brought to be tortured, and it's a famous landmark in Venice. There was sort of an imitation of this whole story by I forget the author, but it was called Death in Venice.
Thomas Mann.
That's it. In any event, I think that, I don't know, in my mind, I got the idea that was his Marchesa de Mentoni was his lover in London, but the other guy actually married her.
Mm-hmm.
And the identity of the son is also up to question. But for some reason,
How did I miss that? Is that real?
no, I'm
Let him keep hypothesizing. Let him go.
Yeah.
Go.
I'm hypothesizing. I just it's almost like he's so bored of life that he wants to end it, but he wants to bring her with him, which is,
Okay. All right. So we got some elements. Okay. Anybody else? Let's keep going, and we can. Let me read something which you heard. Let's see what this means. This is the scene of the child in the water. Marquesa is out there. She screamed. That's how all the attention. And when they say the flambeau, that's the candles. Large candelabras have appeared in all of the windows. And that's why the whole scene is now lit up, even though it's dark. And it's interesting that it's dark because he also says it's in the summer and it's in Venice, but it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the evening. It's not the day before. So why is it dark and nobody's out there? Okay, keep that in mind. Many steps above the Marquesa and within the arch of the water gate stood in full dress the satyr-like figure of Mentoni himself. He was occasionally occupied in thrumming a guitar, or strumming a guitar, in other words. That's what he's doing. That's what the husband's doing. And seemed ennuyed, that is, bored to the very death, as at intervals he gave directions for the recovery of his child. So she's dressed for bed, he's fully clothed, she's young, he's old, she's shrieking, and he's strumming a guitar. And every once in a while he looks up and says, try this, try that. I think you guys better pull out your Godfather references. It might help you. Anyway, Dick, you were going with a certain hypothesis. Do you want, or actually, Kynan, I interrupted you. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, but what I was thinking was that because the narrator doesn't realize that I think the lady, the Marquesa, and the person who saves her, they know each other.
I
doesn't.
think so.
He doesn't realize that. So like all of this is just bewildering to you because like you said, it's not all that it seems.
Okay.
Yeah, so that I guess that's where I was going with that.
Is the narrator getting like duped or something, or like is he part of some kind of scam? Is he?
Wait a minute. Read the fourth paragraph. It was at Venice, beneath the covered archway there called the Ponte dei Sospiri, that met me for the third or fourth time the person of whom I speak. He knows him. Okay? The narrator knows this person about the story, which the story is written.
Right.
Okay, now, who jumps in and saves the kid?
It was
That's the stranger.
the stranger.
Yeah, the guy whose house he was.
Yeah.
One of these guys at the end.
He takes him to his house later. The guy. Yeah.
This is the same person.
Yes.
Okay. And we know, or at least there's a rumor, that he's actually an Englishman. Right?
Yeah.
Everybody's clear about that. And he has a picture of the Marchesa de Mentone.
Right.
That's there. Full-length portrait. Do we know who painted it?
You don't know, but I suspect it's him.
Why? That these lines were written in English, a language which I did not believe with which I did not believe their author acquainted, afforded me little matter for surprise. I was too well aware of the variety of his acquirements, as well as the strange pleasure he took in hiding them from the world, to be astonished at any similar discovery. So we don't know that he painted it.
Right. Yes, we don't know that. I just suspect that. But the narrator, for some reason or other, has also asked him at a certain point, did you meet the Marchesa in London? Because she had lived there for a while before she got married. Right. And then he says, oh, no. In fact, I've never been to England, except the rumors are that he's not only been there, but he's
from there.
Right, he's from there, and he's written this poem, which is also by implication about the woman. Is about a love affair and he writes it from London. You see that, Jose?
I think so. I think.
Yeah. Well, we don't have to. People can think what they want. That's the whole point of what we're doing. I don't know if you have anything in the chat. Let me know.
Yes, I forgot to check.
Yeah, you better check that.
Nothing new. Just people saying thank you for the class. Glad I'm tuning in a little late, but I'm glad I'm here.
Great. Fine. No problem. I just wanted to know.
Sure.
Lynn, you said something important because I think people were talking about whether or not he had authentic paintings. And you said something because he says this, the Venus, the beautiful Venus, the beautiful Venus, the Venus of Venuses, the Venus de Medicis, the work of Cleomenes, the son of the Athenian, as much as it is the work of mine own hands. Part of the left arm and all the right are restorations, and in the coquetry of that right arm. Now, that indicates that he's talking about some forgery or fakery here about this particular piece. The Apollo 2, you spoke of Apollo. It is a copy. There can be no reasonable doubt of it. But he also says, as much as it is the work of mine own hands. That doesn't mean, again, that he made the painting. We know that clearly Mentoni, the elder, has no interest in saving the child.
Yeah.
The guy with the guitar.
The guitar in the beginning, yeah.
That's her husband. That's supposedly the child's father.
Okay, but I'm realizing now because the scroll on the painting, which is, like the description of the painting is very vivid, right? Because you can actually like picture this, right? Her, which but in the expression of her countenance, which was beaming all over with smiles, there still lurked that incomprehensible strain of melancholy, which is, I do believe, inseparable from the perfection of the beautiful. On a scroll which lay at her feet were these words, "I am waiting but for thee." So I think this guy's it's a double meaning because then he continues, her right arm lay folded across her bosom, and with her left she pointed downwards to a curiously fashioned vase. But it's like it's two meanings because it's like she's pointing at the vase, and the scroll says like, "I'm waiting for you," and it's poison. But you could also think like maybe this guy is waiting for the Marchesa, the woman, right? Like waiting for her husband to die or something, whatever. But
well, the story is called, if we assume the story be called the assignation. What's an assignation?
Yeah, I don't even know. Let's look at it.
Okay.
Like a meeting, a liaison.
It's not, yes, a liaison is what it is. It's a hookup.
Well, Google says an appointment to meet someone in secret, typically one made by lovers. Oh, if you got hookups, you should call them assignations from now on. Don't call them hookups. It's much more demure, much more refined.
On the other hand, you might not want to try this kind of assignation.
Oh, man.
So there's a meeting between the Marchesa and the stranger.
Yeah, well, and how do we know that? All right, by the way, she says, what was the reason for the blush? Why should that lady blush? To this demand, there is no answer except that having left in the eager haste and terror of a mother's heart the privacy of her home boudoir, she had neglected to enthrall her feet in these tiny slippers, and utterly forgotten to throw over her Venetian shoulders that drapery which is their due. What other possible cause could there have been for her so blushing? For the glance of those large appealing eyes, for the unusual tumult of that throbbing bosom, for the convulsive pressure of that trembling hand, that hand which fell as Mentoni turned into the palace accidentally upon the hand of the stranger. And what's happening there? Her husband turns his back and she does what?
Blushes. She
read it.
Yeah.
Just read it. The hand which fell as Mentoni turned into the palace accidentally upon the hand of the stranger. It was not an accident. What reason could there have been for the singularly low tone of those unmeaning words which the lady uttered hurriedly in bidding him adieu?
Oh.
Thou hast conquered, she said. Or the murmurs of the water deceived me.
Like, did I hear that right?
Now, thou hast conquered. 1 hour after sunrise, we shall meet.
Oh, the assignation. That's
So
that's
let
the
it be.
assignation.
With an amen. So let it be. That's what amen means. So be it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So when at the end of prayers people say, "So let it be."
Yeah.
Wow.
So what this is a pledge. This is a vow. It's an oath. I'm surprised at you guys. Where is your godfather? I mean, that's what do you think this is?
Yeah, and clearly it's an agreement, since there's very few words, and the words have no meaning to anyone overhearing them, like the narrator. So it's an agreement or an oath that's been made much earlier, much earlier.
Yeah, because he has a whole painting of her. I mean,
Right.
So yeah.
We
So
don't
it
even
clearly
know-
wasn't the first time they're meeting.
Right. So you've got to ask, whose
Oh,
baby
man.
is it?
Well, so Dick's hypothesis, I see.
It's in the poem too. That was
Yeah.
all
Come up, Dick. Come up so we can hear you.
in the poem he wrote. Thou was that all to be, love, for which my soul did pine. A green isle in the sea, love, a fountain and a shrine, all wreathed round with wild flowers, and all the flowers were mine. But the dream, it could not last. Young hope, that didst arise, but to be overcast. A voice from out the future cries onward, while over the past, dim gulf, my spirit hovering lies, mute, motionless, aghast. For alas, alas, with me, ambition all is o'er. No more, no more, no more. Such language holds the solemn sea to the sands upon the shore.
Huh.
Shall bloom the thunder-blasted tree, or the stricken eagle soar. And all my hours are trances, and all my nightly dreams are where the dark eye glances, and where thy footstep gleams in what ethereal dances by far Italian streams. Alas, for that accursed time they bore thee o'er the billow from me to titled age and crime and an unholy pillow. From love and from our misty clime where weeps the silver willow. That's it. To a he got married. She got married to a mafia don in Venice.
Oh my God, this is like
Well, not the mafia.
Godfather
Smart.
3.
well, no, but yes and no. I mean, like it's like Don Quixote, you know, the Cardenio, right? Like and it also ends with a suicide and him going crazy. But like there's a scene in Don Quixote where Don Quixote and Sancho Panza are just like going through the mountains, and like a guy who's like totally a vagabond and beat up, he's like, "You're gonna hear my story," and it's about a guy who fell in love with a woman, and they had an assignation too, to run away and get married together. But the problem was she was supposed to be wed forcefully to a prince, and our guy Cardenio is not a prince, right? So he can't do anything about that. So, you know, on the day of her wedding, she says, "I'm gonna kill myself because I can't be with you." And he's like, "Right back at you. I'm gonna do the same thing." And now I'm forgetting. Does she actually stab herself, or does she not go? No, she doesn't go through with it. That's why he goes crazy, because he doesn't go through with his suicide, with her suicide. So she ends up marrying the prince, and he just goes crazy because he's like, "Damn, I thought this was real love, and she didn't kill herself for me. What the fuck?" So, you know, but this guy, it's like this. He can't be with her, so he kills himself.
Right. Okay, now we got to
Oh, she killed
reveal
herself too, yeah.
something. We're going to reveal something because we're coming up on time. Lynn, can you or should I go ahead, if you don't have it, read the passage concerning Lord Byron?
What?
I have it.
What passage?
Okay. No, this is not in the story.
Have you conspired to do this?
No, she happened to have heard the story some nights ago. And I told her at the time, this story has to be about Lord Byron. Now, that is not original with me. I will make it clear that it was Alan Salisbury, the late Alan Salisbury, who was first doing the work on Poe. And I think he pointed this out first. I may have corroborated it, but it didn't take much to corroborate it. That was before the days of,
Yeah, and by the way, Poe, in rereading it, I realize makes it clear that it's about a contemporary figure. Because he says there's a name, a sound which above all music vibrates upon my ear with a delicious yet solemn melody, devoutly admired by a few who read and by a very few who think. It is a name not as yet, indeed, emblazoned in the escutcheon of immortality, but there nevertheless herald, blah, blah, blah. And then he says, this is ill-fated and mysterious man, bewildered in the brilliancy of thine own imagination and fallen in the flames of thine own youth. So anyway, Lord Byron is a interesting
try to be, we only have a few minutes and then we have 10
okay. All right. Anyway, Byron is born in 1820. I'm sorry, 1788. And he is writing all these kinds of things, but his entire life is one to say sexual escapades would be an understatement, even by today's standards. He just be real quick here. I won't go through the fraud thing.
Let me simply read the paragraph and then you can comment. That way we can do this in time.
Okay. Well, he goes to Venice. He has to leave England in 1816. So he's only 28. He has a breakup in his marriage and he has a lot of debt and so on. So he leaves, sells his library, leaves England, and never returns. He wintered that year in Venice. Pausing in his travels, he fell in love with Mariana Sagatti, in whose Venice house he was lodging. But she was soon replaced by the 22-year-old Margherita Cogni. Both women were married. So Mariana and Margherita are married. Cogni could not read or write, but she left her husband to move in with Byron. Their fighting often caused Byron to spend the night in his gondola. When he asked her to leave his house, she threw herself into the Venetian canal.
Man.
Okay.
Sorry, reread that last bit again. What?
They were fighting, and he asked her to leave the house, so she threw herself into the canal,
allegedly,
in Venice. But this is yeah, it's pretty.
You may have missed the implication
of what Poe is
what Dick just said.
Oh yeah, so allegedly. He's also, by the way, let me just go back one little minute, because when he first leaves, he goes to Switzerland and he actually befriends there Shelley, but it's not clear. It may have been more Shelley's than in betrothed Mary Godwin, Shelley's future wife. She's the one that writes the Frankenstein. But they're joined there by Mary, or there is Mary's stepsister, a woman named Claire Claremont, with whom Byron had had an affair in London, which subsequently resulted in the birth of their illegitimate child, who died at the age of 5 under the care of Byron. It's also at that point that he renews a relationship with his stepsister.
All right, wait. We're getting into Kitty Kelly kind of territory at this
Yeah,
point.
right.
This
It's
is
pretty.
just gossip, okay?
Fun.
So let me just bring this because we don't have much
Okay.
time. And I will simply say to people, we will revisit this territory, including probably this story and a couple of the subsequent ones next week. And I want to say something about next week to get enough time. But just to read to you something that Shelley wrote about some of the time he spent with Byron in Ravenna. Okay, here's what he said. Lord Byron gets up at 2. This is 2 p.m. I get up, quite contrary to my usual custom, at 12. After breakfast, we sit and talk until 6. From 6 to 8, we gallop through the pine forests which divide Ravenna from the sea. We then come home and dine and sit up gossiping till 6 in the morning. I don't suppose this will kill me in a week or 2, but I shall not try it for longer. Lord Byron's establishment consists, besides servants, of 10 horses, 8 enormous dogs, 3 monkeys, 5 cats, an eagle, a crow, and a falcon. And all these, except for the horses, walk about the house, which every now and then resounds with their unarbitrated quarrels as if they were masters of it. P.S. I find that my enumeration of the animals in this Sakian palace was defective. I have just met on the grand staircase 5 peacocks, 2 guinea hens, and an Egyptian crane. I wonder who all these animals were before they were changed into these shapes.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, it's so great about reading these stories and like having to read them again. It's like in the form of it, it's like the painting at the Met Museum, the fortune teller. Maybe I could put this up here, because when it's like a painting where when you first look at it, you don't know what's going on unless you like keep looking at it. Let me see. Here we go. You know, it's like it's not completely obvious what's happening. Oh, there you go. It'll hopefully get a little clearer in just a second.
Okay.
Like it's
Turn up
like
a little.
yeah, like when you first look at it, it's not clear what's actually happening, and it's only when you actually start looking at the various elements of it and you start like actually like picking it apart that you realize what's actually happening in the story. You know, I was just comparing the sort of like rereading these stories and going through the details is like this painting.
You showed the faces, but why don't you go down to where the action is?
Oh yeah, sure. Is
Okay.
a
Yeah, but also take a look at what he's doing.
oh
What's
he's selling something, right? Or he's selling something, or he thinks he's selling
Well,
something.
he's had his fortune told.
Oh.
But why is she giving him what's that?
Oh, because he's not happy. I mean, you can see in his face, right? He's just like, that was bullshit. I didn't want that. I didn't like that. And well, it looks like she's giving him like a silver ducat.
Yeah, he thinks he's getting some change back.
Oh.
But what's actually happening?
Well, you know. Yeah.
Look right over there, and then look at his pocket.
Yeah.
He's getting pickpocketed, and his watch is getting stolen, and yeah, he's cutting it off. You know,
See, those people are working with
the everybody, right? This is called a Venetian conspiracy, if you will. Okay? For all those people that don't believe in conspiracies.
Right.
Well,
he knows something's wrong, but he has no idea how.
Right.
No,
right.
Yeah.
Wrong, but he doesn't know.
Yeah.
It's like the American people talking about the deep state. They know something's wrong, but they have no idea what's actually going on. How bad it really is.
I like to call it the house of handover.
All right, so It's just that we have to end these. We end these classes at 8 because there's a show that's done by. And I'm actually on that show this week. Diane Sayer does a show. We're talking there about what we call the Liars Bureau. We welcome people to take a look at that. Maybe Jose can give them the link or whatever at this point. But in any case, what we can now do, and the reason we had the musical examples, just so this is clear, because we put those in. I don't want anybody to be mystified about why we did that. We actually need to come back and actually read this story again. Start out with that. And with the references filled in. What I'm going to ask people to do for homework for this week is fill in the references. Now, for those of you who read the Purloined Letter, we are going to try to get to that next week, at least start it. It's a little bit of a longer story, but it's kind of, you can actually read it straight through. And we'll just do that next week. And so, but I would advise that people definitely take a look at the Purloined Letter before we do it. You may have already done it. We'll just probably, I think, have to close out now with that. Right, Jose? I think
yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's it. Thank you all for tuning in for another Friday class. And oh, yeah, I don't know where our end card is. So I may just have to, well, it's way up there. It's all right. I'm just going to hit end stream and